Welcome to Let's Talk Health, powered by VitifyHealth. I'm your host, Miles Wingfield, and today we're joined by a dynamic clinical trial leader and health equity champion whose career spans industry giants, groundbreaking startups, and mission-driven advocacy. She has an extensive history in clinical trials in the clinical trials industry, including roles such as Associate Director of Clinical Trial Health Equity at Moderna and Global Site Management Lead at AbbVie, among others. She's helped shape inclusive research practices and improve clinical trial operations across some of the most influential players in the pharmaceutical space. And with that, please welcome Brittany Gerald. Brittany, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Miles. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for hopping on. And I like to just get straight into it. You've held a wide range of roles in the clinical trial ecosystem, from startup founder to director at top pharma companies. What initially drew you to the field of clinical research, and what are the biggest lessons you've learned along the way?
Yeah, so it's so funny. Most people just kind of fall into the industry, but mine was very intentional. My mom was a QA auditor in the clinical research industry. So after college, I was like, I love science. I didn't like blood and touching people enough for med school. And it's funny. I wish I would have known about pharmacy school a little bit sooner because I probably would have gone that route. But either
Mhm.
way, love working in the industry. But I think for me, what I've loved about the industry, and I tell people, it touches so many different things. If people
Right.
just think, oh, clinical trials, it's only, science. Like, no, we have biostatisticians, we have legal people, we have regulatory, we have marketing, we have commercial. And so for me, as I wanted to kind of get a really good foundation in my career and then really kind of grow from there and then grow and kind of go into roles that I was passionate about. And there I saw that really great opportunities. And so really getting into health equity was a big, passion of mine because that is something where I saw from the very beginning is we didn't have representation in our clinical trials.
Definitely, and that's one of the biggest things that obviously I work on here at VitifyHealth, is trying to increase that inclusivity in clinical trials. So, why is inclusivity so important, not just from maybe like a moral standpoint, but even from a scientific standpoint within these clinical trials?
Yeah, and most people are like, "Oh, well, why does it matter? Because we're all the same genetically." Well, I think 97% we are, but there's that 3% difference that we do have amongst different race ethnicities, or I wouldn't even say that. I would say maybe country of origin is kind of what we see.
Hmm.
And so, like for example, a lot of people don't realize like the trait that protects against malaria is also a lot of people of African descent get sickle cell disease.
Right.
So there's so many different small genetic differences that are kind of protective, but also can cause other issues. And so it's also really important to understand how we all operate, but also everyone's also not the same. So you always need to test the medicines on as many different people as you can to kind of see how they interact. I mean, something as simple as, we still don't understand why some people have peanut allergies, right?
Hmm.
But they do happen. But so really the goal is really getting a, representative population of those that have the highest disease burden to make sure that the drugs actually are helpful. And this has been something that's, people just think race ethnicity, but also age. You don't want to take, a drug only testing on adults and like, oh, well, let's just cut the dosage in half and give it to kids. No, it doesn't work like that because kids are not small adults. And so
Right.
really understanding who your target population is and how they actually are affected by it. And then kind of an underlying layer is those social determinants of health, where
Hmm.
looking at making sure that everyone can have access to it. If there are barriers, we make sure we address those because again, companies are building medicines, making medicines to benefit people. We want to make sure that they can reach all those people that, need to have the medicine or treatment.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So as you see the clinical trial industry kind of evolve, change under different administrations, what are strategies for us to, I guess, keep that the main focus, right? Or not even the main focus, but a key focus within clinical trials. Like, what were some strategies that you were using at Moderna, and what can other clinical trial companies use to continue that as we evolve?
Yeah, because of course we know it's always the right thing to do, but what does that mean for a business? And for business, it kind of means dollars. And so I essentially we want to let them know this is important for the conduct of the trial, getting the representative population, because not only when it goes to regulators, regulators want to see that representation once it is approved and being on the market for reimbursement. Who's prescribing it, who's wanting to take it, who's asking for it. So again, it becomes a business need. And I will say the biggest thing we've seen is that the FDA can really come back and say your trial doesn't have enough representation in the population. You need to do it again, or you need to do post-marketing trials. And in post-marketing trials, after the drug's approved, could be anywhere from 25 to 30 to $50 million. So if you're talking about if you do it right the first time, you're not only saving money, but you have a better chance of getting reimbursement from different companies and also getting providers that want to prescribe it and patients that want to take your medicine.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. I kind of want to shift the focus to one of your past endeavors. So you also founded MobiDoc's Health Technologies, and which focused on improving how safety data is analyzed in drug development. And can you share what sparked that idea and what you took away from your time as a founder?
Yeah, it's so funny. It's been like 11 years ago I founded it, but the main thing is kind of why I was interested in the representation. Again, my dad has a number of health issues, a number of medications, and we never knew, was he having a reaction to the medication or is this part of the disease? And there just wasn't enough information out there to really kind of figure that out. So it's kind of built kind of for him, where we would kind of input all of his diagnosis and his medications, and we'd kind of be able to track and see, okay, is this something that's a side effect that's known, or is this an interaction? And so it was exciting because that's around the time, like 2014, when we had this idea of interoperability. You had a lot of electronic medical records, patient portals. So the idea was that patients can manage that and then work with their providers and then feed that to the pharmaceutical company. And so that was great exposure, just meeting and talking to investors, health policy. I was in DC at the time. So just kind of navigating the healthcare, talking to doctors and patients. So really great experience seeing how, we're bringing, how technology can fit into medicine. And of
Hmm.
course, it's not always easily adopted. And so I quickly saw at
Definitely.
that time, nobody cared. Just kind of seeing the different roadblocks that come up, in healthcare whenever you're trying to develop any kind of software or technology.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, here at Vitify Health, we definitely run into that problem a lot. So we sympathize with you in terms of that. So kind of jumping from your startup to some of these big companies that you worked at, Moderna and AbbVie, to industry giants. What would you say were the biggest cultural or operational differences between the two, and what unique takeaways did each experience offer for you?
Yeah, so it's so funny because they're very, very different. AbbVie
Mhm.
at the time, was about 50,000 employees worldwide. And I think when I started at Moderna, I think we were less than 3,500.
Yeah.
And then you had, AbbVie was a spinoff of Abbott. And so they had Humira, and that was their spinoff. And so at the time I was working on a trial that was what is now Rinvoq. And so you had a huge product and huge machine going. And so you had a lot of people that, had worked at Legacy Abbott, so had been there for, 10, 15, 20 years. Then you had Moderna, which was, even though it'd been around about 13 years, their first phase 3 trial was a COVID vaccine trial. And so
Mhm.
it was a newer company. And so just kind of going through, the growing pains. And it was also considered like a startup that, had to grow up. And so you really get to kind of see where, you were an established company that has everything established, or a startup where you're kind of writing the rules and developing things on your own. So it's great experience because it exposed me to different viewpoints. And so now I'm like, hey, I can walk into something day one or walk into something, day 5 million, and I still know where to go.
Yeah, that's that's really interesting to obviously seeing Moderna's impact within that COVID pandemic was huge. So it's cool you were involved. But um, I guess looking forward, what innovations or shifts are you most excited about in the future of clinical trials, and where do you see the most opportunity for systematic change?
Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of technology that I said we buy off the shelf. Pharma's little technology risk at first, but where I really see more impactful, which is why, I love what you all are doing, is really getting that patient involvement. And I say involvement as not just engagement, because we really want them to kind of be involved in the process. And so I think there needs to be better tools of, one, identifying patients to be in a clinical trial, but also while they're in the trial, just kind of monitoring, understanding how likely are they to maybe drop out, or can we monitor their engagement to kind of maybe say, hey, we need to call them, or kind of have a better touch point on them. So I think with all the amazing technology that's out there, like my phone can tell me how many steps I've taken, my temperature, hours of sleep, what if we use that same kind of, monitoring, in the clinical trial space, and just using the same technologies we kind of use day to day, but kind of optimizing it for clinical trials. And I think really getting in that patient interface and really getting that patient engagement is something where I think has a really great chance of being improving the overall clinical trial experience.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And obviously, you're very involved in just new technology, very involved in the clinical trial industry, and serving as an advisor to us here at Vitify Health, where we use AI to try to automate a lot of the chart reviews for these clinical trial people, just to make the process a lot easier. So, what inspires you to serve as our advisor for a young startup in this clinical trial space?
Yeah, I mean, just me, because I'm like a founder at heart. Like, I love a startup, just again, because, solving problems. We see the problem. How do we solve it? What's the solution we can build? So that excites me, but also just exciting me because, the technology there was around 10 years ago with MobiDocs was not around, wasn't around now, wasn't around back then. So I'm always excited about the new opportunities for technology that we have and just who's able to use it. And so again, just being impressed with all of you and what you've studied and how you're applying that, I think is really exciting.
Yeah, thank you. Well, we obviously really appreciate you here at Spotify Health. And so for my last question, I have a very slight throwback, very slight throwback. So back in college, you founded
Oh,
the Minority Association of Free Medical Students at Wake Forest, right?
yes,
And
I did.
so what inspired that initiative? And for pre-med students or early career professionals who may be reconsidering the traditional MD route, what advice would you give them about finding purpose and impact in alternative paths like clinical research or biopharma?
Yeah, so it's so funny. I started it because there wasn't one there. And so that's kind of how I am. If I'm somewhere and look around and there's not something, I'm going to create it or try to create it. So that's just me. It's so funny. I think it was like three of us back then. It was very small. But I would, tell students, and this is why I love the clinical research space. Like, don't think you only have one route, one, but also don't think you can only go one route and that's the only route that you take the rest of your life. I know plenty of people that have had 3 or 4 different careers in their, and they're probably only in their 50s and 60s. So I encourage those to really look at the clinical research industry or any other industry where you just have an interest in, but don't think that you're only limited to, okay, I'm in med school, I can only ever be a doctor. You can absolutely be a doctor, but you can also be a doctor that maybe works in clinical research or has their own product line or has their own business. I mean, I know so many physicians that, aren't practicing, but still using that knowledge in other fields. And so I always tell people just really try to expose yourself to many things as possible, but also don't think if you choose one career path that that's the only thing you can do because you can always pivot and change and come back. And I encourage people to do that because then you become well-rounded individual, but also a better contributor to whatever space you're working in.
Definitely, definitely. And thank you, Brittany, for hopping on. And well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have today. This has been Let's Talk Health, powered by Vitify Health. If you're interested in learning more about Brittany Gerald and her impactful work or the work we do here at Vitify Health, feel free to check us out in the links in the description. Thank you, and we'll see you soon. Thank you, Brittany.
Thank you.